Ricardo Varela, Abuelito 77, hosting Latino Rebels Radio solo. And little technical things at the beginning, but, we're a startup podcast. I'm not even going to complain about it because I'm a big believer in live radio. And I am bringing in Adriana Maestas already on because she's on right now because I know she's on. Adriana, how are you?
I am doing well. And yourself?
Fantastic. You sound great. I had some issues, but I think we got it all under control. And we are going to have a good show. That's the way it's going to be. Okay. So listen, Adriana, we wanted to bring you on because we wanted to talk about what you were. Did I just lose everybody? Oh, man.
Uh-oh.
You kidding? Oh, no, I'm good. This is crazy.
I'm here.
All right, you're here. I'm there. I'm having, internet issues. All right, so you're there. Listen, why don't you just jump in and tell us, this is live radio. I love live radio. Why don't you jump in and tell us what you wrote about last week?
Okay, yeah. Okay, so
go ahead.
Okay, you want me to go ahead and start?
Yes.
Okay, so I, along with another writer, Dolores Avila, who is a writer up in the Bay Area, we were a little frustrated with America Ferrera's thank you letter to Donald Trump. And so we decided to write our own response to it. And I kind of didn't even, there are a few other issues we could take with her response, but part of it was that, America kind of turned this into a larger Latino issue. And I kind of understand in a way where she is coming from. I know that she's in 2008, she's done some work for Hillary Clinton, and I believe I don't know if she's active in this campaign, but I think she's probably a surrogate of the Democrats. I know she's been involved with Voto Latino, which is a nonpartisan voter outreach organization. But so we kind of broke it down, and we sort of we're taking issue with it for a number of reasons. And one of which is that in her piece, she sort of doesn't mention, she never mentions, actually, that Donald Trump's rhetoric is anti-Mexican.
Right.
And within the Latino group, if we're going to lump us all together and look at us like the way the census does, when you take away the Mexican, you're minimizing the largest group in that category. And what we also do is we obscure the movement that brought us to the positions of power today. So when you look back at it, at least out here in the Southwest, we've had leaders like David Sanchez of the Brown Berets, Corky Gonzalez of the Crusade for Justice in Denver, Jose Angel Gutierrez of La Raza Unida, who was in Texas. These men were not really referred to as Latinos. I mean, they're Mexican American, and some of those that I just mentioned are deceased. And, and out of the struggle out here, they would have been referred to as Chicanos.
Right.
So one of the issues that we took is really with, to show solidarity with us, acknowledge us as Mexican Americans, as Chicanos. And then, another thing that we're kind of not so much explored in that issue, but I do kind of want to touch upon is when we're lumped like that, we often end up with representation and spokespeople who don't really reflect our reality and who don't know our history when we're all sort of grouped in that way, especially when you take a national perspective. So one of the things that I like to point out, and which I think a lot of people notice, is in the media, and usually in the white mainstream media, people will say, "Oh, we got 3 Latino senators in the Senate." But what do Mexican American people in the Southwest have in common with Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, and Bob Menendez?
Right.
It's just it's a little. It's like they don't even really come from our communities. So, right. And then, to use another example, within Voto Latino, the organization that America Ferrera is affiliated with, they're led by a Colombian-American woman, and Rosario Dawson, the main celebrity advocate, I believe she's Cuban-American. So, again, you're ending up with sort of spokespeople or issue people that aren't even Mexican-American. Mm-hmm. And then another thing we pointed out in our piece was that America kind of talked about the hardworking immigrant narrative. And this is something that a lot of partisans like to bring up, especially when they're advocating for comprehensive immigration reform. But for us, we didn't find that truly reflective of Mexican-American and Chicana identity, in the sense that, a lot of us have families that have been here for multiple generations. And it's really not uncommon anywhere in the Southwest to find somebody who probably has had family here, maybe even since the 1800s or earlier. So it's just sort of it's not really, it doesn't really speak to us in that way. And then, not mentioned in our piece, but it's something that I've kind of wanted to bring up, is why isn't America speaking out about Honduran American issues? And one that she could be speaking out against, and that she's not, is that coup in Honduras that happened about, it was 5 or 6 years ago.
Right, 6 years ago.
And,
yep.
I'm not going to speak for a Honduran American community, but I just sort of think, that's something that she could be doing, and I'm not so sure if she is.
Right.
And then the other big thing is just, I kind of feel in our community, in some ways we may have been led astray by some of the celebrity spokespeople. And and celebrity people, they don't speak for us. And we have to have our own agency, and we can't just assume because, maybe Eva Longoria or George Lopez or America Ferrera or any one of these people is, performing or appearing with a politician, that we should just buy that hook, line, and sinker. So
right.
that's kind of where we were going with it. Basically to say, like, hey, there wouldn't be a Latino, at least out here in the Southwest, if it weren't for the Chicano and for the Mexican American.
Right. And basically, there's a lot to chew on that, and I want to start breaking it down, but before we do, we're talking with Adriana Maestas, who co-authored a piece with, and I'm looking, you co-authored this piece on HuffPost with Dolores Avila, and it's basically a response to an open letter that America Ferrera wrote saying, "Thank you, Donald Trump," in the HuffPost. It was probably like a week and a half ago, in terms of how it was going to, this response to Donald Trump was going to break out the Latino vote, and, the Republican Party's dead, blah, blah, blah. And it was, that was very well received, but this one was also pretty well received. But not many people are talking about this piece, so so people that are listening, I direct messaged Adriana, and I said, you're a friend, come on and let's talk about it. I think what it boils down to, and we have mutual friends as well, Marce, who's probably listening to right now, is a good friend of both of ours, and we were talking about this piece because she's part of the group, and it really boils down to the peak for me, right, which is sort of when you strip everything down, this is sort of the beauty of digital media, where you see something, you're like, that's not speaking to me. What am I going to do? I am now going to respond and try to present my side of the case. So when did it really hit you in the gut? Because to go from writing a piece for the HuffPost and when did you start? What were the seeds of getting to this piece? You know what I'm saying? I'm sure you didn't sit here.
Well, I'll tell you. And I would be remiss to say, obviously I have used the umbrella Latino term, quite a bit myself in the past decade, but I kind of started to think a little more critically about Mexican Americans in the media and in politics more generally. I want to say after the 2012 election, I just started to think about it, and we saw politics is, what do they call it, sausage making. Right. We all go through that sort of homogenizing thing to be messaged to, and look at where we're at. And I don't think that things have really improved materially for Mexican American people, and maybe even for other people who would more broadly be in the Latino community. So I mean, like, I started to think about it then. I think, like, also too with like the rise of fusion.net. You know, I know that some people were a little critical of that too, because initially, remember, it was supposed to be marketed towards Latinos, and yet the Latinos who were sort of promoting it and who were featured more prominently in it, I don't think there was a Mexican American. Well, there was one guy who was from Mexico who was in it for a little while, but I think his show got canned pretty early. And so,
Kraus. It's Kraus' son.
And even him, he's not really Mexican American. I mean, he doesn't really represent what I would say, like, to be the Chicano experience, not somebody who is maybe born. I mean, he is from Mexico, is my understanding.
Right.
So, I mean, like, I just sort of felt like, in terms of that, and, you know, what people are saying is Latino politics, and you think about, like, kind of the prominent pundits in the Latino political sphere, like, and I'm thinking more broadly of the ones we usually hear, and I'm not, you know,
just go for it. Just let it out. Don't worry about it.
Okay. I'm thinking about, like, the Ana Navarro, and to a certain degree, like, sometimes even Maria Teresa Kumar. You know, like, some of them, like, and sometimes, like, it's funny because, like, their names just, like, slip my mind. I mean, they're really not from the they're not from the Mexican American community. I mean, you got a Colombian American and a Nicaraguan American, right? And so, you know, I just sort of feel like that voice is lacking. And so I've started to take a little bit more notice of it. I've kind of felt this way a little bit before then, but now, I mean, and that's where I feel a lot of the attempts to market to us sometimes come off so badly, because the group is so diverse, and I don't know. I just, at this point, I'm kind of the opinion that maybe we're really not representing and acknowledging the accomplishment of Mexican Americans when we lump them all in with a Latino label. And I will also say this as somebody who kind of a little bit came of age politically in the 1990s, at least when I was in college out here. We would refer to what the general media calls it Hispanics or Latinos. They were distinctly Chicano and Latino. So, you know, people would say, oh, there's Chicano and Latino students. You know, it was both. And I think that in a way that was a little bit more empowering, because it was definitely a mention of, like, yep, there are Mexican Americans, and then there are, you know, there are other Latins who might want to be called this, but if they want to be called something else, we're going to call them that.
Right.
And so, I mean, that's basically, that's where I'm at. And I think also, too, America Ferrera was making a lot of assumptions in her piece, you know, like one of which was, you know, this is going to drive voters. And, you know, I pointed out that we don't really know what's going to drive us to the polls.
And we don't vote.
Right? Yeah.
I mean, seriously. I mean, let's be real. Like, you can take any subgroup, any group, and you look at it from a monolithic, you know, from the big slice, from the little slice. Certain groups in the Latino community don't vote. And so it's a really, that was the one where it's like, I don't know if a year from now who knows? I mean, in the internet age, who knows? Because, you know, nothing goes away. Right, but
well, yeah,
but
I mean, her assumption, Julio, was that, like, well, the racist comments are going to drive us out to vote. But in the piece that Dolores and I wrote, we said, well, hey, let's look at a state like Arizona that has its fair share of politicians who make crazy racist remarks frequently, right?
Right.
You know, the Latino vote in Arizona,
and they're all elected. They all won office. You're right. That's a good point.
Yeah, and even to a lesser, well, maybe I don't know. I don't know to what extent it's similar, but maybe you could look at Texas. I mean, I'm sure, and I haven't done a real sample of all the comments made out of there, but I mean, you know, Ted Cruz agreeing with Donald Trump. I mean, are Mexican Americans in Texas saying, "Yay, Ted Cruz, keep agreeing with them because you know this is going to be our opportunity to shut you out too." I don't hear that kind of response.
Right.
So I just think, like, her whole analysis was really I don't know.
What did you say? What did you tell me, or someone told me this? I don't know if it was Marce or someone, but it definitely had a Beltway, D.C., Washington, D.C. type feel to it, no? I mean, it felt like that.
Yeah, it
was like
it definitely
down.
did. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody wrote that for her and she just signed her name to it. But and that's the other thing I think is a lot of the rhetoric we hear coming out of Washington, D.C., why it doesn't really resonate with us, and which could maybe be a reason why we're not so excited to vote, or we don't vote as we should, even though there are many other factors to explain it, is that, you know, the messaging just doesn't really speak to us.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, that's something to be said. I mean, before we get into sort of the reaction to the piece, but I think you've hit on something very interesting, is how these campaigns who are trying to realize that there is a different demographic out there, how they're approaching it. And to me, it feels that it's still kind of stuck in the mid-2000s, that this type of conversation that you're having with me or you're having with other people, or we're talking about sort of the diversity or the differences in the community, that type of complexity hasn't really hit that critical mass in a political campaign, that it's still, you know, si se puede, and let's talk Spanish, and we're good. And I think that's just my sense. I'm not sure. It just doesn't feel like, if you told me right now if there's a candidate out there who truly understands the issues you raise, the issues other people raise, I don't think there's any national candidate that thinks so.
No. I think that not at all. I think that on the national level, they're so into trying to find a message that is, I don't know, maybe unifying for everybody, or that is just sort of safe for everybody, that they're not really going to get into that. And and that's why they're trying to. I saw an article this week, I think it was in BuzzFeed, about like trying to market to this group like selling Coca-Cola. I think Hillary Clinton's campaign was going to try to do that, and I think, you know, is that what we want? Is that how like we want to be talked to? Like we're being sold Coca-Cola?
Right, in terms of how they, that was Adrian Castillo's piece, that about how the Clinton campaign is going to be approaching this sort of from like a national advertising, regional advertising strategy. That I still don't know what that strategy is, to be honest with you. I read that piece and I was like, what are we talking about here? I didn't get it. I didn't get it. I personally didn't get it. I think I'm a smart person. I really do. When I read things like this, I really think I'm a smart person, and I kind of look at the campaign and I'm like, huh?
Well,
it's like overthink. Anyway, listen, so you wrote this piece. It did create, you know, on our site, it created dialogue. It created a lot of intense reaction.
Mm-hmm.
So what have you heard both about this, you know, because sometimes when people, you know, part of writing and part of opinion writing is that you're going to, you know, being provocative or being, and I wouldn't say your piece was provocative. I think your piece was honest. I think it was a very strongly written argument.
Well,
so
okay, I'll tell you. I've heard it from both sides. Like, I have had a lot of positive feedback from Chicanos and Mexican Americans who are very like, yes, thank you. You know, we don't need celebrities who don't have our experience speaking for us. Like, I received quite a few of those, and then I did get some where some people are saying, well, you're dividing us, so you're a Republican. And I'm going to tell you what, I'm not a Republican, and I'm not so sure that there's, like, so much pan-Latino unity to begin with. Mm-hmm. And the reason I say this is, all right, let's just use an example.
Yep.
I know that there's a debt crisis, and that's going on in Puerto Rico right now.
Yep.
Now, from my vantage point in California, I don't really know a lot about that. I know a little bit about it. I know that it sounds like people over there are under duress, and that is, has implications from colonialism, and that the people there not having really, I don't know, their full rights as they could have in their own self-determination and that sort of thing. But I don't really know the particulars of, like, who that's affecting and what it is. So, you know what, like, in that regard, I'm not so sure that even Chicanos or Mexican Americans out here in the western states would even know that much about what's happening on that island. As an example of where, I'm kind of, where I'm saying I'm not so sure that we're that in solidarity and that lockstep with each other. Let me ask you this before you continue. Do you think that sense of not solidarity is because people aren't being informed? Because when I find, like for example, when we share stories about Puerto Rico or we share stories about Central America, and you talk about, issues of colonialism, issues of, people understand Puerto Rico in the context of colonial structure, or they understand sort of I find that once we start informing people about an issue, then there is this sense of, oh, there's more of a shared knowledge and a shared unity. We're not 100%, similar, but we're a lot more similar than, a lot more unites us than divides us. You know what I'm trying to say? Yeah. No, I think that there is definitely some truth to what you're saying, but the key thing there is, like, informing people, right? Making sure that we know what that is about, and that, but
and that comes from the community. See, for me, that comes from the ground up, right? That doesn't come from celebrity letters.
No,
which is
not
different.
at all.
Just,
you're right.
So the way we've approached, you know what I'm saying? And that's where I'm kind of like, that gives me hope. I'm just telling you as a friend, like, that gives me hope. And I'm not trying to cut you off. It's one of those, like.
No. I think you're right. That when Chicanos and Mexican Americans from wherever in the country learn about those issues, and they're like, okay, maybe I can draw some parallels, or I can see how this relates to, if not my experience, and maybe another group's experience, but then I understand it. But I also think that there's something in the sense of saying, well, you know what, that issue right there that we're talking about is particular to Puerto Rico and the island and the Puerto Ricans and the Boricuas, and it's not saying that, like, that we don't care, but it's like acknowledging and saying, aha, that's specific to them.
And to be honest, with you, not every the vast majority of Puerto Ricans don't even know what the hell's going on either. So it's not just, so you can imagine, like, for someone that's not Puerto Rican, and we don't even understand what's going on as Puerto Ricans, I can totally get the fact that other people that aren't Puerto Rican looking at us going, what the hell's going on?
Right? Like, what is that? I don't get it. No, I think that like what people are trying to do, and I think it's a matter of convenience for marketers and also for the political parties, is to just conveniently lump everybody together and not tease out those groups.
Right.
And that's where we also get back into, like, kind of what I mentioned, but maybe was not in the piece, but which I think is sort of really uncanny, is America Ferrera, her lack of speaking out on Honduran American issues. And I'm talking about that coup in Honduras a few years ago that a lot of people say, and
people know, and we're actually bringing on Suyapa Portillo Villeda in a couple of minutes. After, not that I'm hanging up on you, but I'm just saying in the second half. And she's actually wrote a fantastic piece about sort of LGBTI rights in Honduras and how it's connected to. She just wrote a really good piece this weekend about, rights for trans and queer people of color, and in the context of Honduras. But she is a professor. She's an Honduran professor. But I agree with you on that one, especially given the coup d'etat that happened in 2009. And there's plenty of stories and plenty of newspaper articles showing how the Department of State, of which, a presidential candidate, Democratic presidential candidate, was head of during that time as Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, and how the State Department really they pushed that. I mean, there's a lot of documentation about how the United States was heavily involved, or not heavily involved, but there was influence. And what's interesting about that specific case, Adriana, is that it goes back to Latin American sensibility. So for me and other people that follow Latin America, that issue is getting so underestimated by someone like Hillary Clinton, where I'm finding a lot of young, and not just Central Americans, not just Puerto Ricans, not just Chicanos, but a lot of young Latinos, just from all over, understanding that story and all that happened as a result of the Central American migration, that is a direct, effect of U.S. policy, foreign policy. And there's this feeling of just, at least a sense I get from the people that, Latino voters, young Latino voters who are looking at Clinton, this feeling of distrust. And that's why they're going and looking at the Bernie Sanders of the world right now, or the Martin O'Malley's or other people. And that, I look at that, and I've had friends of mine saying, you guys are overblowing what happened in Honduras. And I'm like, no, because it's actually fresh in people's minds. And if you think about it, it's such an issue that's so complex. A celebrity like Ferrera, who is of Honduran descent, you would think of all the things that she would be the most passionate about right now, that would be the one. Just like I'm passionate about Puerto Rican issues. That's what I would think. You're passionate about Chicano issues. Like, that to me would be the natural place.
Yeah, no, I see where you're coming from that, and but this is where I think where she's sort of, even though she doesn't come out and say it in her Thank You Donald Trump piece, is I think she's sort of doing the bidding of the Democrats and perhaps Hillary Clinton at this point, because it's not in Hillary Clinton's interest to be mentioning that too, and not really with the Democrats, since it happened during a Democratic administration, even though, like you said, and there are consequences to that too that are reverberating straight up between Honduras and the U.S. through Mexico, to this day, right? I mean, it's not, and there's a lot of dealing with the aftermath in places like Texas and in New Mexico and some of these other communities where some of those child migrants have ended up. Absolutely. I mean, that's where it's a little frustrating, and I think that, other Chicanos and Mexican Americans and Latinos need to really kind of think a little more critically about the celebrities that are brought out before us to speak about politics and why they're doing it and who they're ultimately serving. Because I think until we do that, we're going to kind of get the same tired, si se puede kind of politics that we have.
And these are the type of conversations, like, this is where I sit back and go, I wish more of these type of conversations that we've been having for the last 32 minutes. I inherently, sincerely wish that these are the type of conversations we could have in a lot of forums, because they do speak to deeper issues that have been a part of us, like, of different groups, and then to just say, I'm kind of the optimist. I'm very optimistic. I do think in the grand scheme of things, I'm going to have more in common with you than I am going to have with, a white old man from Kansas. Like, that's just that is just a given, and that's what kind of drives what we do and what other people do. And I just think you're right, thinking critically about what's behind the message, who is promoting things, and telling people that no matter what, everyone's voice is valid, whether it's good or bad, whether you can disagree or agree, or whether you want to slam someone or praise someone. People have valid voices, and I would rather have people. In the grand scheme of everything, I'd rather have everyone speaking out, whatever they want to speak out against, or speak up, or be vocal, than just kind of saying, oh, let me just, let's just be quiet and kind of go with the flow. And I think that's where I think that hopefulness of true unity will happen. So that's my soapbox moment.
Well, my thing, because I know you want to bring on your next guest, is that
finish up. You get the last point.
Yeah, well, I would just to add to that say is if you want to show solidarity with us, like as Mexican Americans, as Chicanos, acknowledge us as such. Say like, hey, I get it. That this has sort of, there wouldn't. I don't even think we would be talking about like an organization like a Voto Latino or the Latino vote in general if it weren't for, people who are in the Brown Berets and in the Crusade for Justice and in La Raza Unida, and even the some of the radical groups of Puerto Ricans on the East Coast. There wouldn't
there's a history.
be that.
There's a history in a lot of places. You're absolutely right. And
I think we need
I think that's a great point.
Yeah, I think we need to say it. And for those people that don't want to be lumped in it, just say like, okay, I understand. You want to be known as a Chicano or as a Mexicano, and
that's cool.
And I respect that. And because that's otherwise, cool. I mean, another thing I was accused of is dividing Latinos, and I think I just would say this, and it kind of gets a little bit back to your point, is if you do disagree, you're welcome to write an opinion piece and anywhere and submit it to see who would want to accept it. And, I'm not stopping anybody from doing that.
Right. No, and this is what I tell people all the time. You never hear a lot of people saying, well, you wrote that you're dividing white people. You know what I'm saying? where the point is, like, in the mainstream, this happens all the time. Like, it's so accepted where you have different writers having different views. But anyone that kind of strays off the view is seen as divisive, or I come from the school of like, just speak out, just talk, just share, just be bold, and have conversations, because that's how we are going to progress. And I just have a different take, but that's why I wanted to have you on. And I could talk to you for 3 hours, but we're gonna have to bring you on later this year. But,
all right. Well, hey, we'll have a good night, and I'm gonna like actually turn on my sound so I can hear your guest.
Yeah, no, that's fine. But I will say, like when I was on with Ballard last week, I made it a point to say this. I think I was one of the only guests last week on MSNBC where like this is anti-Mexican sentence, and I said it twice. So that this is in the end. You're right. I mean, and that type of story needs to continue to get shared. So I really appreciate it. Abrazos. I will talk to you soon.
All right. Well, have a good night.
I'm going to bring in Suyapa. Okay, cuídate. Bye.
Bye.
Adriana Maestas. Never, never, never boring conversations with my good friend Adriana. Incredibly smart. Anyway. Let's bring in Suyapa Portillo Villeda. How are you? This is Julio.
Thanks for having me, Julio.
For you. How are you? I apologize for waiting.
No problem. It's really interesting conversation.
Yeah, because that was one of the things. Like we don't have. It's what we were talking about. These type of conversations don't happen, and people need to. The assumption is that if you have those conversations, you're divisive. Where in fact, I think Adriana brought up some really, really valid points on the piece that she wrote, and I'm glad I talked to her for 40 minutes. But now I want to talk to you.
Okay.
And your first piece, which I finally read Saturday, and it's on LatinoRebels.com. It's called "Respect: The Hemispheric Fight for Trans and Queer People of Color," and I, as the editor, as the publisher, I get the final read. And I'm going to say this, for a first piece, it was amazing. It was amazing. So can you just kind of walk through the piece and your main thesis from it? Because I think it's a true connect the dots type story, and I just wanted you to tell people about it.
As many of us Latinos, Chicanos, however we identified South Americans. Catrachos, immigrants, right? Sons and daughters of immigrants. We live these multiple intersectional lives. We're right. So interconnected. We're constantly connected to Latin America. We're connected to what's going on in the U.S. in terms of race and immigrant politics. We're connected to all these issues, right? We leave all these selves that oftentimes, as a scholar, I have to set aside, right? And I have to kind of focus either on Latin America or focus on Chicano-Latino issues in the U.S. or Catracho issues in the U.S. versus, and the disciplines where we study were actually the connections of the conversation you were having earlier in your show between Mexicans, Chicanos, and the Latino concept. Those conversations happen, but they happen in classrooms or they happen in graduate schools, and then they don't make it out into the society, right? It's like a taboo thing to discuss it. Same thing, right? We don't really bring all of ourselves together oftentimes. And so I read this piece in the New Yorker written by Edward Dandicat on the issue of Haitians in the Dominican Republic and, the stuff that they're facing. And I thought it was beautifully crafted because she linked the migration of African Americans to the northern United States. She linked immigration. She linked Central Americans and what's going on. And I just thought, this is how I feel. I want to bring all of myself into this, the Catracha, the Honduran, the immigrant. So the piece really, number one, was to really kind of show how our issues are interconnected, right? The same month that Jennifer Gutierrez is, interrupting the jovial President Obama speech, we see that there's a murder in Honduras of trans woman, and that she was shot dead during right during a march, one of the indignado marches or the outrage marches, and the police is preventing first aid that could potentially have saved her, but we will never know, right? So she passes away at the same time that these marches are happening. You begin to reflect on after the coup d'etat of 2009, there was a political party built, and there was a movement called the National Resistance Front movement created, which has given sort of a base to this new movement of the outrage, right? That movements kind of pile on top of each other, that they are built through these foundations, right? And it just really sort of connected for me, the violence and the anger I felt at watching the video of Jenny Sett be kicked out.
Right, and for people that,
and to see the gay community.
For people who haven't seen the Jenny Sett Gutierrez piece, let me just give it a little bit of context. It did go, she was at a pride reception, right, and spoke out and interrupted the president, and based on patients and detentions of trans and queer people, and basically migrants, trans people of color, queer people of color. And Jenny Sett was in the bigger mainstream, say, LGBTI community, right? She was, let's say, non-people of color. She was heavily criticized, right? She was seen as disrupting. She was seen as disrespectful. And you talk about it. You connected with the Honduran case, but you talk about the issue of the homes, which I thought was a really interesting part of this. And
because,
say more about that.
Yeah, well, basically, when I saw her get kicked out, I just thought, and he says, "This is my home." I think about the fact that a black man is president at the White House and how hard we Latinos worked to put that man there, because we turned Colorado and New Mexico and Arizona, and those were all Latino students, Latinos who donated a month, 2 months to go walk those streets to turn people around, because we knew that even though a home had undocumented people, there would be at least one citizen that could vote, and that vote was valuable. And so he was there because we put him there, and he knows that. And you can look at all the data on voter rights and what's been happening, but we put him there, and it was our vote that tipped the table for him. And so, it almost angered me. The first thing I thought of was, this is your home. This is not your home. We made it your home. We pay taxes too. And then it made me think about, in our culture, how offensive it is to throw someone out of your house. When you identify something as your house and you say, get out of my house, it's really sort of the most offensive things you can do to an individual as Latinos, right? If someone threw me out of the house, I won't talk to them for 20 years. I mean, it's like a really serious offense. And and for those of us, my mother and I came here when I was 9 years old, and we were homeless. We lived in people's couches, and we unfortunately had these bad experiences in people's houses, right? Because nobody wants people to stay forever. So I know what it's like to be sort of thrown out. I know what it's like to also have people extend a hand and say, you can stay in my back room, or you can have a bed, and those concepts are so important to migrants, to Latino culture.
Right, and the point you made about, and before we move on, but the point you made about, because being a student of Latin American history, you got me about the point about, when I finally read the piece, you got me about the point of, during the time, during the time of the dirty wars, where people would literally knock on doors and hope for a place for shelter and fear for their life, and people would bring them in, and that was just an interesting take.
Americans are used to talking about hiding, let's say, Jewish people in Europe during the Holocaust, which was a primordial, thing you wouldn't do if you were German and you were housing a Jewish person. You had to hide them. I mean, we lived that in the 1980s in Central America. Many of us are here because of the wars, and the U.S. refused to recognize, us as refugees. Many people from El Salvador and Guatemala came here not having a place to stay, in Central. And so this is something that really spoke to me because, Eduardo Galeano has a short piece that I probably didn't paraphrase correctly, but it's in El Libro de los Abrazos, the Book of Embraces, where he says that he had a friend with a bunch of keys, and in South America and Uruguay, you call people mi llave, like mi llave, like my key, because that's your friend, right? That's how you were saved, and you know where to go. And it would be great if you could have a key of a house in the major streets when you were running away from police or when you were protesting. Yeah. That was the implication, but the story is a little bit, different. But I just, and then also the time of Jesus, Las Posadas, which we celebrate every December 12th, which is also a Mexican tradition, but also it's a pan-Latin American tradition, where Jesus' family was looking for housing. And so the house and having someone in your house is so sacred, and it's so important in Latino culture. And to throw them out is such an offense. It's like you're saying, I never want to talk to you again.
Right. And then you get into, and again, if you haven't read this piece, please go to LatinoRebels.com. It's on the front page. It's called Respect the Hemispheric Fight for Trans and Queer People of Color. It blew me away. In how you argued Honduras in the context of the U.S. and a president that is complicit. I mean, let's be real. They would deny it, but there's enough out there to suggest.
He's not denying it. He's not denying it. If you read Hillary Clinton's biography, she states she knew if she could force elections in Honduras as soon as January 2010. That the point of Zelaya returning would be moot. And I'm quoting directly. I mean, this is incredibly offensive. Like, she was just really saying to the public in her biography, we pushed elections for this reason. And then the 2011 release of WikiLeaks also states that the U.S. Embassy was well aware.
So they're well aware, and this is sort of, postmodern Monroe doctrine on, second. Here we go again. But you bring out you make the comparisons between how, the house that is Honduras, that Obama is interrupting that house.
Right.
And that was a really interesting angle. But we published a really, really powerful firsthand account about the indignados in both Spanish and English about 2 months ago about the protests.
Right.
And So how do you wrap this all together with what's going on in Honduras right now, with how the U.S. is responding, and how this all matters with LGBTI rights? I know it's a big question.
Right. No. But I'm glad that you're asking a complex question, because usually when I do media interviews, I only get to be very specific and talk about little things. I'm very excited to be here and put it all together.
And we have a good 11 minutes. We have a good 10 minutes, and that's a long time for radio.
Okay.
So go for it.
I know. And one of the things is that kind of look at the White House, and Jenny said getting kicked out, right? This Latina migrant demanding respect. There's no other venue to get to the president but this, right? So the idea that she can be kicked out, but that Hondurans, and I'm talking 8 million Hondurans, the majority of whom are protesting, because the indignado protests are not just the very, very working poor. I mean, it's a multitude of classes, races, genders. In fact, some of the communiques list LGBT organizations and organizers and human rights defenders that are LGBT and primarily transgender. So you begin to see this kind of intermingling of different communities coming together with the indignados. And, $90 million lempiras are stolen by a corrupt government, right, a nationalist party that was sanctioned and put there by Hillary Clinton and therefore the Obama administration, that there's no, there's a random impunity in the country, that nobody is sanctioned, that nobody can be put in jail or investigated, right? It's that the Supreme Court system is destroyed. But why, looking at the House of Honduras and our uninvited guest, that is the president and his Department of State, along with the Drug Enforcement Agency and the FBI, because the FBI is in Honduras as well, training, quote-unquote, military police and police. We have these uninvited guests that we can't throw out of the country. Even though we're a sovereign nation, we cannot throw these people out of the country because the president was put there by them. And so you may think, you're taking away the agency of Hondurans. Hondurans have agency. They're protesting. They're letting the world know, I've spent countless days and nights writing and talking about this issue publicly as well as others have. And we still can't tell these people to go because they, in the name of a U.S. form of democracy called free trade, are selling it to this nation, right? So their brand of democracy is imposing these free trade rules, which create all this migration problem. People are migrating because they can't get a job, because minimum wage is so low that you can't afford to pay, say, internet, which has to be paid in dollars, not in lempiras, which is our national coin.
Right.
People can't afford, a pair of tennis shoes. People often have one pair of shoes if they're going to be at school. And, so the children that are migrating, are facing these limitations. You may have a degree from a university, but you can't get a job unless you work in a free trade zone, like a maquiladora or, one of those parks, doing something that you didn't study for. And if you're a teacher, for instance, you will only get a job in a faraway school, or you need to have sort of political clout to get assigned, unless you work for a free trade school where people speak English and they're teaching English or they're teaching computación, right? So, it's not like, it's true. This is something we're facing in the United States too, that we have a lot of people graduating and we don't have the jobs for them, right?
Right. Sounds like Puerto Rico too.
But there's hope.
Where I'm from.
But there's hope, right? There's hope. People can, start out doing something and eventually get to where they want to go. Honduras doesn't have that hope, right? If you're not part of the elite families or part of the nationalist party, if you're not, have money, the only way to survive is through immigrant money. And there's probably the second largest GDP in Honduras is from remittances from immigrants. And we're talking mostly undocumented immigrants, because if you look at Honduran migration in the U.S., very few people are citizens or legal permanent residents. Most of them came after Hurricane Mitch. Most of them do not qualify for temporary protected status. Most of them would fall under DAPA if that were to be to happen because they fall in between Hurricane Mitch in 1998 and then now. So people, I wanted to connect that. I wanted to connect all of the violence created in Honduras, the lack of, processing and taking people to court and being able to know that there is a legal system that protects you. And then what does that mean for LGBT people? Because people are talking about all the children migrating. Like last June, right around this time, there was this whole craziness about next year we're going to have 90 billion children from Central America. Many of them are LGBT, and I know that because I act as an expert on many of these asylum refugee cases. And most of those young people are also LGBT, are also trans people who are migrating because of violence, because they cannot exist in the cities. McDonald's in San Pedro Sula will not hire a trans woman ever. There is no mall that would hire a transgender person that is out. And being trans is not something that you can hide, right? Like, when people are transitioning, it's not something that you can hide in the closet like a person that represents their gender, right? So if I identify as a lesbian and I look feminine, I should be okay if I live in the closet, right? It's more and more difficult in these years of people. Here on the one hand we're saying, right, because the USAID and the State Department do have this program on LGBT rights, right? So Hillary on the one hand is really progressive on LGBT rights, supposedly, and there's money going down there and saying to people, it's okay to be who you are, right? But then on the other hand, you're not enforcing the laws that would protect LGBTI people by, eroding justice and sovereignty in a country, right? That everybody knows, and research shows that if a country is progressive, then it will likely be more progressive with LGBT rights. Look at Argentina, right? Look at Mexico City. When you have progressive movements and progressive leaders, you will have progressive rights for LGBT people, for women. And so it's what's happening in Honduras is like this mess, this chaos created by the United States. The right thing to do would have been to let Zelaya back in the country and to let Hondurans resolve their issues, whether it was with Zelaya or not with Zelaya. Why did the United States have to meddle there? And, what did it gain from creating this incredible chaos that killing people? We have about over 200 murders of LGBTI people. The majority of them are trans, and cold-blooded murders. I mean, I mentioned one case of the woman in 2014, Monica Chakira, in the piece, where she's being beaten, and Channel 6 is recording it, and the military police is there, and they're not stopping it. And that's a common sight, in San Pedro Sula. So you can't, on the one hand, the State Department can't say, we like you because you're LGBTI and you're a person of color, but, we don't support your governments because they're too progressive, or because they don't fall in line with free trade laws, or because they joined the Bolivarian Project for the Americas, or because, they want to enforce tariffs on exports of, bananas, or,
Yeah, they actually want to worry about themselves as opposed to capitulating to what the USA wants.
It's all connected. And it's this, and we as Latino immigrants and as Hondurans, as Mexicans, as anything, we are these complex people. We are interconnected. Yes. We send money home. When someone is sick, we worry about it. We send money home because we know that when they stole $90 million from the Institute of Social Security, that means that there is no diabetic medicine. There's no medicine for diabetics. There's no medicine for HIV.
There's family and friends. Right.
If you when my grandma passed away at one of these public hospitals, we had to bring everything to the hospital, including the needles. So these are the kinds of things that outrage you because, as an immigrant, as a complex person, as a whole person, right? It's not just about an agenda or about getting the Democrats in power. I mean, they have failed us miserably because, great, Hillary might be good for Latinos. She might be good for LGBT, U.S. people. She's going to be terrible for Latin America. Right?
But she supported the coup.
I mean, she's going to be a disaster for Latin America.
You know what I'm saying? But that's the thing. It's like you could be. That's the point that you're making. It's you could be progressive in a lot of things, but at the same time, you were a major force in making sure that the coup happened. So what does that mean?
Right.
You know,
right.
so that's where
that means we have to be
I
complex
go,
people and demand more from our elected officials.
And I told this to Adriana, there's a complete underestimation of issues like Honduras by these politicians. You know, people think, people think like, oh, Honduras, Central America. No. Let's, you know, you're starting to talk about populations that are concentrated within other immigrant communities, and that's where I was talking to Adriana about the interconnectivity of it, that people start going, wait a minute, I respond to your issue of migration. I've been there, even though I'm not from your country. And that's where I think, and that's what you're saying. Listen, Suyapa, we can go for another half hour, but
I know,
I got
we
like
could
45
really
seconds left.
Have the cafecito and, you know,
we have a cafecito.
Talk a little longer.
I really, and, you know, you wrote one piece. You're more than welcome to write as many more as you want. It was a fantastic piece. It was a great conversation. Please stay in touch. You know where to find us. We were honored to publish your piece. I know we were a little bit crazy last week, but it was a really good piece, and thank you for your patience. But again, Suyapa Portillo Villeda, you got to read Respect, the Hemispheric Fight for Trans and Queer People of Color. Abrazos, hermano. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay, abrazos. Ciao.